This video might look like a simple airport arrival at first glance. Nothing chaotic, nothing dramatic. Just a quiet moment as Taehyung returns to South Korea after completing his schedule in Japan. No stage lights, no performance, no grand announcement. Just a calm walk through the arrival area of Gimpo International Airport. And yet, this exact moment keeps being replayed. Not because something obvious happened, but because of something so subtle that it almost slips past unnoticed. The kind of detail that doesn't demand attention, but quietly lingers long enough to make people come back and watch again. On April 20th, Taehyung arrived in Korea in a low-key manner. The atmosphere inside the airport felt unusually still, as if the space itself had slowed down. Bright white lighting reflected across the polished floor, while footsteps echoed softly, blending with the quiet clicking of cameras. Fans stood at a distance, not rushing forward, not overwhelming the space. Some watched in silence, others whispered, careful not to interrupt the moment unfolding in front of them. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was focused. Then the doors opened and he appeared. Dressed in a look that felt simple but intentional, Taehyung carried a presence that immediately drew attention without trying to. A dark outer layer framed his silhouette, balanced by a clean inner piece. His movement created a natural rhythm, each step measured but effortless. Even the smallest details, like the way his clothing shifted as he walked or how lightly his shoes touched the floor, contributed to the overall impression. His sunglasses didn't completely hide his expression. Instead, they softened it, adding a layer of distance without disconnecting him from the moment. Everything about the look felt controlled but not forced, composed but not rigid. That balance is what makes his style stand out. There were no loud statements in what he wore. No overwhelming elements competing for attention. Instead, everything worked together quietly. The colors, the silhouette, the movement, all aligned into a single impression that felt natural rather than constructed. It didn't ask to be noticed. It simply existed, and attention followed on its own. As he continued walking, his pace remained steady. Not rushed, not slowed down for effect. Just consistent. His posture stayed relaxed, his shoulders at ease, his gestures minimal. There were no exaggerated reactions, no unnecessary movements. Only small, controlled shifts, subtle enough that they could easily be missed. And then there was a moment. It lasted less than a second, so brief that it could disappear if you weren't paying attention. But somehow, that exact fragment became the most replayed part of the video. Not because it was dramatic, but because it felt different. A slight pause. A nearly unnoticeable adjustment. A shift that didn't break the flow but changed the feeling of it. It's difficult to define clearly. And that's exactly what draws people in. Was it intentional? Or just a natural movement captured at the right time? There's no clear answer. But the way it was captured makes it stand out. The angle, the timing, the continuity of motion all come together in a way that feels unexpectedly cinematic. Even without staging or direction, the scene carries the rhythm of something carefully composed. As the video spread across social media, people began focusing on that specific moment. Some pointed it out immediately. Others only noticed it after watching multiple times. Not everyone agreed on what it meant, or even if it meant anything at all. But that difference in interpretation is what keeps the moment alive. It becomes less about the action itself, and more about the act of noticing. Because once attention is drawn to something subtle, it changes how the entire scene is perceived. What initially felt like a simple walk begins to carry more weight. Not because anything major happened, but because something small shifted the way it was experienced. Moments like this don't rely on intensity. They rely on contrast. In an environment where everything moves quickly, even the slightest hesitation becomes noticeable. In a sequence where everything remains consistent, even the smallest variation stands out. And when nothing feels forced, any change, no matter how minimal, begins to feel intentional. As Taehyung continued walking, nothing outwardly changed. The pace remained the same. The distance between him and the crowd stayed controlled. The overall scene didn't shift dramatically, but the feeling of it did. Some noticed how the lighting briefly softened across his silhouette. Others focused on how his movement aligned almost perfectly with the surrounding rhythm. The footsteps, the cameras, the ambient noise of the space. It created a moment where everything felt connected, even if only for a second. Then there's timing. Airports are usually defined by urgency. People move quickly, transitions happen without pause, and moments rarely have time to settle. But here something felt slightly delayed. Not enough to interrupt the flow, but enough to be felt. That slight difference adds weight. And the human mind naturally responds to that. We're drawn to patterns, to consistency, and when something doesn't fully align, even in a small way, it pulls our attention. We look closer. We replay it. We try to understand it. Sometimes, in doing that, the moment grows beyond what it originally was. But that doesn't make it meaningless. Because what people respond to isn't always the action itself. It's the feeling it creates. That quiet sense that something stood out, even if it can't be fully explained. And maybe that's why this moment stays. Not because it demands attention, but because it invites it. Each viewer notices something different. Some focus on the visual details, others on the atmosphere, and some return to that brief moment trying to understand why it feels distinct from everything around it. There isn't a single answer, and maybe there doesn't need to be one. As the clip comes to an end, Taehyung disappears from view just as quietly as he arrived. No dramatic finish. No final gesture. Just a continuation of movement, fading back into the ordinary rhythm of the airport. And yet the moment remains. Not as something loud or clearly defined, but as something that lingers. A brief pause. A subtle shift. A detail that almost went unnoticed but didn't. But beyond that fleeting moment at the airport, there's another layer to this story that continues to unfold. Because that quiet arrival wasn't the end of something. It was a transition. A shift from one kind of presence to another. From stillness to the stage. As part of BTS World Tour, Taehyung stepped into an entirely different environment. One that couldn't be more opposite from the calm atmosphere of the airport. The controlled silence was replaced with anticipation. The distance between him and the crowd disappeared. And the subtle energy that once felt almost hidden began to expand into something much more visible. But interestingly, not everything changed. Because even on stage, where everything is amplified, there's still a trace of that same quiet control. It shows up in the way he moves. Not rushed, not exaggerated, but deliberate. Every step, every turn, every pause feels connected to something internal rather than purely performative. While the scale of the stage is massive, his presence doesn't rely on overwhelming motion. Instead, it draws attention in a different way through precision. And that contrast is what makes it stand out. In a setting where energy is often expressed through intensity, Taehyung brings something else into the frame. A kind of restraint that doesn't reduce impact but refines it. It creates moments where the crowd's focus doesn't scatter, but narrows. Not because it's forced, but because it feels intentional. During several performances in Japan, fans began noticing these details more clearly. Not just the choreography or the visuals, but the transitions in between. The seconds where nothing big is happening, and yet something is still felt. A glance. A slight shift in posture. A pause that lasts just long enough to change the mood of the entire stage. These aren't the moments that are usually highlighted, but they're the ones people remember. And in a live setting, that effect becomes even stronger. Because unlike a video, there's no replay in real time. Everything happens once, which means every small detail carries more weight. Every subtle change becomes something that either passes unnoticed or stays with you long after the performance ends. That's where Taehyung's presence becomes particularly interesting. He doesn't fill every second with movement. He allows space. And in that space, the audience leans in. Not physically, but mentally. They pay closer attention. They anticipate. They begin to notice the transitions, not just the highlights. And suddenly, the performance isn't just about what is happening. It's about how it unfolds. This is especially noticeable during moments where the music softens, or where the choreography becomes less structured. Instead of treating those as empty spaces, he uses them. Not to add more, but to let the moment settle. To let it breathe. And that breathing space changes how everything else is perceived. Because when a performance moves at full intensity from start to finish, the impact can blur. But when there are shifts, when there are pauses, controlled movements, and subtle transitions, the contrast becomes clearer. And clarity creates impact. Fans who attended the Japan shows often describe this feeling in similar ways. Not always with the same words, but with the same idea. That there was something about the way he carried himself that made certain moments feel more defined, even without obvious emphasis. It wasn't about standing out in the loudest way. It was about knowing when not to. And that awareness creates a different kind of connection with the audience. One that isn't built on constant stimulation but on attention. The same attention that made that brief airport moment stand out. The same attention that turned something small into something memorable. In a way, the stage and the airport aren't as different as they seem. One is quiet. The other is loud. But in both spaces, the same pattern appears. A balance between movement and stillness. Between presence and restraint. Between what is shown and what is only felt. And maybe that's what ties everything together. Not a single moment, not a single performance, but a consistent way of existing within those moments. Whether walking through an airport or standing under stage lights, the effect remains. Subtle, controlled, and just noticeable enough to stay with you. So what do you think? Did you notice it too? Or did it feel like just another ordinary moment?